Man, I'm still riding that high from last weekend. Charles Oliveira is one of my top dogs, man. We're basically growing up together. Charles Oliveira and I have the same birthday, October 17th. He's just 2 years younger. Get him. I'm so happy for the guy. I can't believe he finally made it happen. It's just one of your tried, tested, and true grinding stories of the UFC. For a guy that had to come in and face the competition that he did, he really did learn from his mistakes and get better and better and better. And I think now he's about to go on a real reign in one of the toughest divisions on the planet. And let's be honest, everyone's kind of hoping that he goes on enough run that maybe it brings Khabib out of retirement. I don't think it's possible. I think this guy's very much moved on with his life, but this lightweight division is starting to really open up over the next few months. So I'm excited to see where the rest of that goes, because let's talk about the co-main, right? Beneil Dariush beating up what looks to be a brand new Tony Ferguson, in not such a good way, right? Like, I think that this was a fight where you expected a certain version of Tony, and to be honest, even between the medias and the weigh-ins and everything for how good he looked, he just, the striking's not there. The speed is definitely, regressing. I think that, I think it was Dean Thomas that said it so perfectly well. And it's like, not only are the athletes catching up, but, before people might have been afraid of what Tony was going to do. But even as an athlete and stuff like that, he was so unorthodox that he's kind of, regressing from what looked to be a very, very unorthodox and tough puzzle to solve early on, is now just becoming a little less pressured in terms of presence in the octagon. And all of these freak athletes now that are coming up the wazoo in the UFC are starting to learn how to focus on themselves to be able to deal with that game plan, which is also regressing, like we said. So I'm interested to see where he goes from here. My personal opinion is Tony Ferguson has been fighting the best fighters on the planet for, most of his 30s. And I think the guy's earned an opportunity to just get a win on his belt after such a great run. I think this is a situation where, does he need to be taking on the best fighters and the up and comers and the, guys trying to squeeze into the top 10? I don't think so. I think you can give him a guy who's either on the come up or making their debut. That's a big name, little things like that. Who knows if Tony says yes, but I believe that if he wants to stay in the UFC and he really believes that this is a comeback, then he kind of needs to go back to the drawing board. You need to change the game plan. In this top 5 and top 10, it's easy to see that guys are solving the problem. And on top of it, he's just not the same fighter. So you have to make the right adjustments to become better. A guy like Beneil Dariush, for his age, he's looking really good for the next few years. That's what I really wanted to touch on. He's actually improved in being just a complete athlete and a complete MMA fighter, that you're seeing the results, and it's very consistent, which makes him such a dark horse to kind of make anybody, not shit their pants, but have a good little bout with him, because, his story with Justin Gaethje opens up that argument, if that's even a fight that's going to happen. But I would love to see them go at it, record some of those training sessions and get us to see some of that. There's a whole bunch of training sessions I would love to watch. That's kind of the best part of trying to get your hands on some tape from training camps. But, going into this fight, I really let's be real. We went 5-7 last week. The few things that I want to touch on is the lady fights. Anthony Shevchenko, even from a pick'em perspective, I can't get her life right. I feel like with her, it's either she's meeting the right person that she can take down or outstrike, or it's just a complete dominating fight for the other fighters. So big kudos to Andrea Lee for finally, ridding herself of that three loss streak that she was on. I think that she looked a lot better in that fight than she's looked in the past, especially as the fight kind of, went on to the end of that round. She was just ready to end that and be as dominant as possible if the fight kept going. That was my favorite part of that. But, even if we want to touch on things from a betting perspective, Priscilla Cachoeira was one of the main ones that I was kind of indirectly pumping on the show last weekend. I think that was a great fight for her, right? Mazzani it's just tough times when it comes to the striking game, and Priscilla just pushes, man. She take a punch and just keeps going. So, we're going to kind of do the same thing. Hopefully have some nice little picks to throw out there a bit more formally, but let's keep it locked and let's keep it ready, because I think that this card's looking really, really good with Rob Font and Cody Garbrandt headlining. Across the board, I've been preaching about it before, but the UFC matchmaking right now is just phenomenal. And I'm going to use some stats, as I usually do, to kind of force how good it actually looks on paper, whether this is intentional or not. It's almost far too coincidental for it not to be intentional, but the matchups across the board this weekend are not only going to dictate where even the lowest of ranked fighters are going to go moving forward, but also where some of these guys kind of land in the top. I think that the flyweight division is about to get a lot of attention on this card, and obviously the bantamweight division, so much riding on that main event. So let's kind of jump right into it before we kind of give too much away, right? So, we were kicking off the card with Rafael Alves and Damir Ismagulov. So this fight, I honestly believe could have been on the main card. Now, the reason I say that is Rafael Alves, he's come in through the Dana White Contender Series now. In that fight, I felt like even there he was forced to deal with some length in Flores, but man, he had no issues. He pushes the pace, very exciting, very fast. I mean, I think he's way too chiseled for 145, so it's going to be interesting to see what he does at 155 and see how easy that weight cut is for him. But he was a thick man in a good way for 145, but again, so powerful. The moment the fight was, taken to the ground, he locked up the guillotine and didn't look back. He's got really good chokes and he sinks them in tightly. That's the part that I think Damir Ismagulov, if it goes to the ground, needs to be very aware of. But going quickly into him, I would say that the striking game looks phenomenal, right? I got to say that this is definitely one of the top prospects in the UFC, kicking off the card in a big way, in my opinion. And, the technical aspect of his game and his agility, I wouldn't call him fast. I think he's agile. I think he's able to use his footwork to set up his own strikes. I think he's very, a great counter striker. So when he's stepping side to side, you're seeing him land a lot of good jabs and a lot of good combos. That's the part that makes me excited to see him fight, because the one thing that's really impressive is that he seems to be able to go 3 to 5 rounds, no problem. I think that in terms of the evidence that we've seen in his previous fights, I really like the game plan. When you look at the Thiago Moises fight, I mean, he even rocked him a little early in that fight, and it got more even over the course of the fight. Thiago Moises was, considered to be a top 10 fighter and very much on his way to seeing top talent in the UFC. We saw the Bobby Green fight last year, but that's where I'm seeing like Damir Ismagulov having such a good, background already going into this fight with some of the guys he's taken on. And I think that the striking is going to be a big problem. If this fight doesn't go to the ground where Alves can be kind of more explosive or even on the feet, like I think Ismagulov's going to have the footwork. He's going to have the technical aspects of his striking game to kind of combat some of that forward pressure, some of that hulking style. We're so used to it. So many Brazilian fighters too just love that coming in boxing. And I think that with Ismagulov, it's a tough matchup for Alves, because I think that Ismagulov really does pride himself on being able to hang back, being able to pick his shots, use the footwork. And I think that's where I really enjoyed his previous fights, because you can see that his 100% takedown defense in his 3 UFC fights is coming from using that footwork, being able to gauge the scrambles and use the sprawls. I mean, he's just so technical, and that's what makes it such a fun fight, because you've got technical, fighter with great striking versus an absolute, brawler, beast type, super speed, combos for days, very creative. That's the stuff that makes interesting fights, right? Because you're going to really have to stack up which guy you kind of lean. And right now, to be honest, Damir Ismagulov for me is just such a big, I think he's a huge prospect. It's just that with Alves, between weight problems and just the Dana White Contender Series thing, I feel like we just haven't seen him fight enough since that belt. But in this case, Damir Ismagulov is a huge name for him to take on right away. So I'm excited to see him get that fight under his belt and see how he stacks up, because for me, the technical game of Damir Ismagulov, the way he can attack all 3 levels, I think that's going to be a little tough for him, because from a competition perspective, I think this is the toughest fight of his career. We can quickly take a look and see if I made a mistake on that, but I don't think so at all. When you even look at some of the fights that Damir Ismagulov, Thiago Moises, Joel Alvarez, and Alex Verdes in his UFC career. So I think that you're seeing him take on increasing, level of skill, and this is a big fight for him. So right now, as usual, let's take a quick look at the lines. We're going to pull up the first line of the day, and right there, man, without question, I mean, is there another way to look at this? I think that you have a great example of the technical versus the brawler, and at minus 550 opening, and now sitting at minus 550 to minus 600, we can obviously see where this one's going. Alves has that finishing ability, but I'm curious how that gas tank's going to look. If he can't get that finish in that first round, how is he going to look against a guy who's clearly proven that he can strike at his best for all 3 rounds and maintain 100% takedown defense in the process? That's going to be an interesting fight. I think if it gets up against the fence, let's see how good Damir Ismagulov is able to get out of there, avoid the clincher, because even if you get it up against the fence and you're staying there for too long, and he does enough to keep it there for an extended period of time, he's going to get the control time on that. So that's where, maybe Alves can pull off a bit of an upset, use some of that strength, use some of that forward pressure, that fearlessness can sometimes play into your hands if there's no knockout power coming the other way. So if he's not feeling any danger in the strikes coming at him, yeah, he might get pegged a little bit, but getting in there close, getting some good body locks, even if you can't take it to the ground, where you push it up against the fence, just stay in close. I think the closer you can get to Damir, the better the fight chances, the better the chances are for you to win the fight. So without any question, if you're seeing him spend too much time on the outside, if you're alive better, by all means, start looking at that Damir fight if it's going down, because that's an interesting call. And I mean, in terms of over-unders, I don't really have a lean on any of that yet, but my slight lean on Damir being a good favorite for this fight makes a lot of sense. And I just think it's a lot of that technical skill. The tape really proves that he's a guy to keep an eye on in terms of just even ranked fighters. So this is the kind of fight where it's his to lose. And that's where, going back to what I was initially saying, but Alves, this is really a good fight for him to propel himself into the next tier. And seeing how well he was at 145, and even knowing that it's kind of a tough cut for him, this fight at 155 is going to be one to watch, so I can't wait for that. Man, if that last fight doesn't get you pumped up, this one has to. The reason I say that is because Yancy Medeiros loves to brawl. He trains with the Diaz brothers and Max Holloway. Think about that for a second. He loves to brawl. Now, looking on the flip side, when we talk about Hadzovic, it's a fighter that, we haven't seen so much of, but in the fights that we have, it's kind of like, if he gets the opportunity to strike, he puts on a show. But, when you talk about the last two losses, I really enjoyed the wins that he put together against Polo Reyes, but in the two losses, that's what we're going to touch on the most, right? Because it's what he didn't do right. When you think about how easy it was for Christos Giagos to time his takedowns, we saw how good he was in his last fight. And, I talked about it in the previous video, but he's also really good at switching his stance and striking. He's not a terrible striker at all. And in fact, he had a great showing against Soriano. And in this fight, it's game plan to perfection, right? Why stand there with such a heavy-handed and heavy-footed kickboxer when you can just time the takedown so perfectly to get this fight to where you need it? Now, we can go right into the Renato Moicano fight at 155, and the same story, right? I think that Moicano found an opening to take it to the ground. And to be quite honest, it looked like Hadzovic was getting frustrated already, even on the feet. I think Moicano just had something to prove and was very ready to make a statement on that night. And there was actually some bad blood towards the end of that fight. And I think it had something to do with the stand-up. And supposedly Hadzovic was like, he wanted a rematch right away. And he wanted to be the next fight for him because he wanted to keep it standing. Like, what? You're an MMA homeboy. So I was a little taken aback by that little back and forth at the end of that fight. But my main thing that I want to take away from, just his overall performance is that if he's going to push forward like that, he needs to have kind of a bit more versatility in his approach, because I find if you take a look at a guy like Yancy Medeiros, who can kind of do a little bit of everything, right? I think we've seen it over the course of his fights. Now, the one thing we don't want to see is hands low, throwing crazy and getting tired. These are the areas where Yancy Medeiros need to work on things, right? When you talk about the Lando Venata fight, what's great about Lando Venata? He makes his fights interesting because he doesn't really lose any gas. If you keep Lando Venata in the fight for 3 rounds, he's going to give you the best version of him for 3 rounds. In his case, the Bobby Green, very similar fighter, and you played into his hands a little bit. On the flip side, Lando Venata dominated that 3rd round against Yancy Medeiros. And I think Yancy Medeiros was just fading and wasn't able to keep up with what Venata was kind of throwing at him. Now, in this fight, it's almost like you're not taking on that good of a speed and versatile striker, in my opinion. I think that Hadzovic comes in with really big hooks, good kicks, but they're thrown with power. And I think that his approach is very much push forward, and try to land. So if I'm Yancy Medeiros, I got good body kicks. I can use some leg kicks, use my long jab. He likes to use his jab really long. And I think that if he can grind out a fight on the feet and just keep his distance, that's one way for him to win. And the other way, I really think he should have a grappling advantage here. When he's training with the guys that he is, originally he uses it mostly for defensive abilities to be able to keep the fight standing. But in this case, I can't see a reason why he wouldn't want to take this to the ground and exploit some of those weaknesses in Hadzovic's game. Because if I'm Hadzovic, there's one very clear path to victory, and maybe he's working on other things to do, in this fight specifically, but it's get into boxing range. It's avoid any kicks, avoid the takedowns, and just try to make this an absolute brawl. If he's able to land some of his own kicks, slow him down to the body, that's where Hadzovic can have success. Medeiros is known to tire. So if you're hitting the body on a regular basis to a guy who's kind of tough to finish on the feet, via strikes, I think that's the best option for him. Because I don't think that he's going to be able to duel him on the ground and in the clinch work and stuff like that. Medeiros is an absolute gamer. He's got heart. And that's where these Hawaiian boys, like, it's tough to put them away, but you got to be technical about it, right? Like, that's when you're going up against guys that can take damage and go 5 rounds, just absolutely like giving it everything they've got. You got to be technical about it. Outsmart that aspect of their game, because he wants to brawl with you and he wants to be able to attack all 3 levels and dictate pace and get it to the ground if he needs to, all that kind of fun jazz. In Hadzovic's case, I feel like the writing's on the wall when it comes to his game plan. I don't think that he's approaching this fight and thinking like, I'm going to watch a bunch of tape on Yancy Medeiros and see what I can do. Because the one thing for him also is maybe hang back a little bit, make him come to you, be more of a counter striker early round, make him force the energy, because in the second and third rounds, if you get the Yancy Medeiros version that's a little bit slower after so much output, you might have a bit more success in avoiding the groundwork, maybe being able to beat the jabs and the kicks to get into boxing range and just start landing some big blows. Because that's the one thing about Hadzovic is we got to give him, a little bit of credit for his power and his striking ability. So with clearly such a, it's funny, his reaction to the Moicano loss is what makes me realize he just doesn't like the grapple so much. It's an obvious aspect of his game when he's calling out Moicano immediately after the fight to rematch. So that's where I'm kind of just seeing such a hole in his game. Obviously, it'd be better than the average UFC fighter, but I think that from a game plan perspective here, I'm not going to say better. Sorry, that's a terrible way of putting it, but I think it should be at par with the average UFC fighter, if not the below average UFC fighter. But in a fight like this against the Yancy Medeiroses of the world, who have seen the Cerrones, the Gillespies, that's where, for me, even in fighting Lando Venata, right? In the Venata fight, it's very clear that the exertion, the tired aspect of it, Venata's energy to be able to increase and go with that output for 3 rounds. I mean, that's where he lost. That's where I think that he can actually make up for that fight in this one, where it's be more technical, keep those hands up, fight hard, and look to take it to the ground if you need to. And when you look at the lines, you've got minus 125 for Yancy and plus 105 for Demir. So they definitely think this fight's going to be standing. And like I said, there's areas in Yancy's game where he makes the mistakes, which is why you kind of got to give Demir some credit, because in those areas where he makes those mistakes, that's where Demir can win the fight. So I actually will be leaning Yancy for now, because I do think that from a technical perspective, from just overall waiting the fight for this long, I think he's got what it takes. And so that should be crazy exciting. If it doesn't end in the first round, expect that to be a war, a bloodbath, and 100% a potential fight of the night. So keep it locked. We're going to keep it rolling. Xiaonan and Josh Culibao. Now, I mean, there's not much tape on Xiaonan, unfortunately, but I was able to get my hands on a couple of his old fights. And I actually did make a video of a bunch of the fighters that were featured on UFC 261 with all the, fighters coming over from the Shanghai PI on the Zhang Wei Li and Rose Namajunas card. So check that out. The fight against Zhang Ru, unfortunately, he does get knocked out pretty badly, but let's take a look at Josh Culibao. He's an 8-1-1 fighter. I think that draw was a very questionable fight, right? I think he looked really great in that first round, but then all of a sudden he kind of fades, right? And in those fights where you're seeing a guy who looks really good in the first against a guy who kind of brings it on in the second and third rounds, I mean, it takes some time for Jordan to kind of find his footing, but in that second and third round, it felt like he did enough. Maybe I'm a little biased, Canada. But I do think that this is a fight where he could have come away with the victory. I mean, you had one judge give it 30-27 for Jordan, one judge give it a draw, and then one guy give it 29-28 for Culibao. So still a relatively close fight, especially with that first round. But I think that in the Jalen Turner fight, you kind of saw something different, right? You saw the idea that he wasn't really so focused on kind of creating bigger exchanges, because, I think there was a good size difference, and Jalen Turner was actually doing fairly well in that fight. The one thing I like about Culibao is he suffered an injury there, but his takedown defense is still, pretty pristine at that 100%. Got injured, got back mounted, and got finished on strikes, right? Happens to, pretty much anyone on a bad day. And I think that was the area where you kind of want him to improve, right? Such good fighters like Jalen Turner, Charles Jourdain, all guys that have seen some pretty good action with whether it's the Dana White Contender Series or the UFC. I think that Culibao has kind of earned the opportunity to fight someone on this level. You're seeing that a little bit now. I think that some fighters are getting really big opportunities to fight guys that maybe aren't getting opponents, that want to fight them. But in this case, it's like the opportunity for the other guy to prove something of himself. And Xiaonan Xiaolan's in that position, in my opinion. I mean, I'd be hella shocked if Carla Esparza isn't the favorite here. I think he's got good power in his hands. He just can't fade. You know, pick the shots carefully. Keep your hands up. Don't take anything too quick, because I also believe that Xiaonan should have a speed advantage. I don't think he's going to have an MMA advantage at all. I think Carla Esparza is going to be the better MMA fighter. And in fact, I think that if this fight does go to the ground, he should have a much bigger advantage. And maybe it's up to him to take it to the ground, right? If you go look at Xiaolan's fights, I mean, that Road FC one that I did speak about, that was he did wrestle and he got his victory via ground and pound. So he has shown some of that, but that fight was in 2017. And since then, it's very much been standing battles. And I do kind of question the quality of opponents, if you will. His last win, which was the knockout, that got kind of, his excitement brewing, was against a 3-5 opponent. So when you're kind of 18-3, now you're taking on a 3-5 guy. I mean, that experience does play a part, I would say, in those types of fights. But now he's getting a guy who's pretty much, way under that type of number, closer to that halfway mark, and at that 8-1-1. You could actually make the argument that Carla Esparza's competition is a little bit better, right? I think that in the MMA realm of things, his level of competition, especially in the UFC, is significantly higher. I think the Rong Zhu fight, when you saw how he fights, on UFC 261, I mean, if that's any indication of, some consistencies across the board, big time strikers who don't really like to keep their hands high at the smaller weight classes, they seem to have a good speed advantage. So that's where I see how good Xiaonan is. I think he's going to be a really good striker in this fight. But at the same time, I think that the size advantage, the experience, I do think that Carla Esparza deserves to be a big favorite. Not a big favorite, but a significant favorite. At least around that minus 190, minus 200. Like, there's no question that he should be in that range, because just the experience alone in that 8-1-1 is significantly higher than 19-3. And looking at tape of both guys, you just have to give him the edge. And just sheer MMA quality, right? Technique, heart. I think he knows a lot more of what's going to be happening, even in terms of shifting your game plans, things like that. Just experience-wise, I don't think that Xiaolan's going to be able to see as many looks that he's going to be able to get in the UFC now. So with that said, let's hop right into these lines. I'm kind of excited to see this one. And yeah, man, I mean, I'm pretty far off of the current line. I mean, the opening line was minus 225 at the plus 190 for Xiaonan, but minus 275 now. If you really see something in Xiaonan in that limited tape that's available, I mean, there's a pretty big dog there for you to ride, but I have to give the edge here to Carla Esparza. Whether this is a bet to make, I'm not 100%. I do think that there's a potential for a finish here, and especially if those lines are getting kind of, juicy. The Carla Esparza has shown good power in the first round, especially early in that 1.5 type of round area. And Charles Jourdain has a chin for days, so I think that's where you have to give him a bit of credit, and he has some finishes on his record. So definitely a fight to look into. Underrated, maybe not so much excitement coming out of it, in the previous two, but I think there's some excitement to be gained heading into it, especially once we see the weigh-ins and see some tape. Hopefully that the UFC puts together something for Xiaonan that maybe none of us have seen yet, but, I think that's going to be a great one. Underrated fight for sure, but it should be an exciting one. And with that said, man, I just want to keep it going, because some of these smaller weight classes are kind of fun to watch now, right? A lot of quality opponents. And so Bruno Silva and Victor Rodriguez. So, Victor Rodriguez, we kind of broke him down in more detail when he fought Adrian Yanez. Adrian Yanez seems to be a guy that has a tough time getting his fights, finalized and stuff. Not on his part, but it seems like it's tough for him to get an opponent. I think that Victor Rodriguez did his best. The way we broke him down was Alaskan fighter, likes to grind. It was very old school style fighter, right? It looks like this was something where out of a, early mid 2000s type of playbook, right? He was exciting in the first round, was able to really work towards the takedowns and work in some ground and pound against the guy who can just take a lot of damage. And it took him a while to get the finish, but he did get it, was able to ground and pound him. And I think that when you look at the skills of his opponent, Jared Mazurik, he reminded me of, he looked a lot like Matt Dan. The way I kind of saw that fight going was grapple a bit more, but never got top position, was taking a lot of damage on the feet. And Victor Rodriguez was able to work his way into top position and just finish it with strikes. But now you fast forward to the Adrian Yanez fight, and the way I broke it down was very much a brawler style technical. And that's why I'm so in love with the way Yanez fights, right? Because it's so technically sound. I mean, the way he feints, the way he looks for he picks them perfectly. And I think Victor Rodriguez was not ready for that kind of opponent. Definitely knew that was going to be a finish for him, and I think that the odds were outrageous anyways. Not like there was a ton of money for you to make if that was your cup of tea. But the thing with Bruno Silva is the guy's a beast, right? He trains out of fight ready. I think we're starting to see him really find his footing. the JP bias, right? I think that fight was a great example of where he was able to showcase some of his skills against the guy that is a little bit more closer to his level. I mean, he hasn't been able to see such looks in the UFC, and to take on guys like Tagir Ulanbekov and David Dvorak is a pretty significant jump. So that's where I think that Bruno Silva deserves that, second wind, if you will, that second opportunity to really kind of showcase his come up, because in the previous fights, like we said, there's just these opportunities for, very new fighters to make a name against big names. And maybe if they pull it off, they could get a huge opportunity in their careers. But, more likely than not, it's going to be a tough fight. And, I'm glad that he makes every fight exciting. That's the part about him that you cannot ignore. But, going into Victor Rodriguez, we kind of said, right, very much a grinder, very much needs to, see a lot of looks to improve his technical skill. Maybe spend a lot more time in one of the camps like ATT or Extreme Couture, where you're getting to see not only opponents that you could potentially face in terms of skill, but you get to see all of the coaching that goes into these fighters. Game plans are based on your bases. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it would be a good opportunity for him to see where he can take his game to a new level. Now, this is going to be a tough fight. I think that Silva's finally getting an opportunity to fight guys that are more on the come up like him. And, the Ulanbekovs and David Dvoraks of the world definitely are a main card, looking to get into the ranked areas. And with Silva, you saw really good striking against JP Baez, right? I don't think JP Baez, he was not able to get any type of offense going. And that's where I think that the footing, the boxing, that's where Fight Ready's starting to really create some good fighters. And I think Pitbull brothers are pretty good examples. I mean, it was a tough Bellator showing, but, moving on from that, I think that this is a situation where, like I said, Bruno Silva deserves to be a favorite. I think that he's finally putting it all together, gets an opportunity to fight guys where he can really showcase his skill and get more looks as a UFC fighter. And on the flip side, when I'm talking about guys like Victor Rodriguez, I just think that there's a lot of gap to make up for, another Alaskan fighter, Carlton Minus, right? You can definitely watch these guys fight and say, there's technical value there, but in terms of athleticism, in terms of speed, those are areas where there's significant improvement to be made. And I'm excited to see them, come into their next fights as different fighters, because that's the one thing that you can't, we always talk about how the fight camp that are the areas where they're improving that we know nothing about. So coming to this one, I hope that to see a much better and improved version that we saw against Adrian Yanez. And so with that said, let's take a look at these lines, baby. Okay, so with that said, Bruno Silva opened it at -300, now looking at it as a -370, -340 type of fighter. I think this is his fight to lose. Victor Rodriguez is a tough fighter, but I think a technically sound game plan can piece him up for long enough that I don't even know if he's going to be able to last the 3 rounds based on the fighter that we saw heading into the Yanez fight and coming out of that. Now, if he's made the significant improvements that are needed, I think that's an area where he's going to be able to showcase a huge upset. I think that this is also an area where if he can get this fight to the ground and maybe really work some top position and maybe do what he's used to over in Alaska, I think that's where he can maybe even get some confidence as a UFC fighter and kind of put his game plan together over the course of 3 rounds, because I think that's where he's going to be able to see just how tough it is at this level. So the lines are obviously saying one thing. Who knows what happens in camp? We're going to be able to see the weigh-ins and see how different he looks, versus his camp against Adrian Yanez. So I'm excited for that. That was a short notice fight. So keep it locked. I think these guys are going to have a great time in there. Now, talk about overs and stuff like that. I mean, the previous fights with some of the lighter weight classes, I thought they would go over, but that's a great one to consider even an under, man. I think that both guys kind of, bring that edge to them that even by the second, third rounds, energy-wise, there could be a slip up enough for one of these guys to finish. But, at a -300, now moving to a -370, -350 line for Bruno, we can all say that this is moving in one area, right? All right, now this is a guy I've actually been waiting to talk about for so long. Chris Barnett, who is he? Where did he come from? Well, funny thing is, if you keep your ear to the ground, I mean, this is a guy that, he's been around, man. He makes his way around the U.S. He trains at almost every fight, major fight camp in the U.S. I mean, good friends with Stipe, it looks like, based on his Instagram profile. Spends some time at Jackson Wink and I think that's where, even with Alistair Overeem, he's very close with him too. So that's where I'm actually, really excited to see him. Biggie Bear was his old name, or Huggy Bear, sorry, was his old name. Now he goes by Big Boy. But I really liked what I saw from him in terms of personality. Now, when we look at his fights, there was something really funny about his UAE fight where he got the finish. That was a fight where his opponent took it on short notice. He was actually a coach who ended up having to make his debut against him, and that's how he got the finish. But, I think that this is finally an opportunity for Big Ben Rothwell to get into the octagon and get a fight, because frankly, poor guy's been waiting almost a month now to get in there. And I think over the course of the last year, we've seen Big Ben try and make improvements and look like a better fighter. I think he's still hovering in that top 10, but I think guys are getting better and better. And now he gets an opponent that where, if he's able to keep some distance, use some legs and kicks, he's going to be able to find some success. The one thing about Big Boy is that this guy comes from a long line of athletes. His brother is a middleweight champion in Taekwondo in the U.S. I think that happened quite some time ago, but he's always been interested in martial arts. And so he goes on a nice little rant in one story that I read where he talks about every single time, he just went into a gym and picked something up. Oh, Taekwondo, him and his brother started doing it. So he's always been interested in martial arts. And it seems like, coming from an Army family, his dad was, an Air Force family. I think that he has a lot of that traveling side in him. It really is kind of cool to go to his Instagram profile. Just scroll through it. You can clearly see that he spends time at all these different gyms of all the big ones in the UFC that we come to know. And I think that's really good for him, because if you look at his style, he's a thick boy, but he kind of moves, man. He's quite quick. Look at this. Man can dance. I'm pretty excited to see him at least get his UFC opportunity. This was a guy that people were talking about almost 10 years ago in terms of the different types of style that he brings and how we should be talking about him more. There's a lot of those types of stories out there if you do some digging. And so I'm kind of excited to see what he brings to the table, because frankly, like I said, the last opponent that we're kind of basing a lot of his, recency bias on is not someone you kind of want to base too much of your opinion on Chris Barnett on, because I think that when you go through Big Ben Rothwell's record, it's insane, right? Some of the losses he has are pretty much against, championship level fighters in the UFC and closer to their primes too. So that's where I do like what Big Ben Rothwell brings to the table here. And he does like to throw kicks, and he fights long. And I think this is a fight where if he can keep the fight at a distance with a guy who's only, listed at 5'9", that's a fight that he should be able to fight, a points match with and really keep the distance and enjoy it. Because think about it, Taekwondo fighter, he's going to want to throw some big kicks and keep it, long, but he's not that tall. This is a massive, discrepancy in terms of height. It's a good 7 inches. I think that's an incredibly different height difference there for a guy who enjoys kicking and being quick on his feet at heavyweight. If Big Ben Rothwell comes in good shape, which he's now been in a fight camp for a very long time due to his opponents, so that's going to be a tough fight where I think that, Chris is going up against the guy who's definitely been waiting to fight. And we know that he likes to fight long. Fights out of his own camp, right? Big Ben Rothwell's always been about Rothwell MMA, and he has his own thing going on. And that's where we've always had that question, right? Do people need to advance their game to really step up and be the next, level of themselves? And when you look at his record, you can make the argument for him. But in any case, I think that he is one of the best fighters that we've seen in the UFC. He has a phenomenal record to show for it. Now he gets a guy at 21-6, not so many crazy names, but the guy's got a grappling match against Joel Romero under his belt. The guy just seems to do it all. And I'm excited just for him to get onto the big stage and showcase what he can do both as a personality and as a fighter. I think that he's exciting. It's just when you talk about the quality of opponent, you talk about past fights that you can even grab highlights of. It's just a very interesting career to follow. And I think that's where some of the differences are going to stand out in this fight. But outside of that, man, if he can get it close enough where he's in kicking range and can throw for power and kind of showcase his surprising athleticism. If you go look at tape of him, for a big boy, he can move. And so that's where I kind of want to give him a lot of credit. Now, moving into Rothwell for the last little bit here, if he's not the favorite and really dictating the overall pace here with, Huggy Bear trying to get in there and make this a fight, I would be very surprised. Let's take a look at the line, shall we? There it is. So minus 275 opener for Big Ben. Now he's moved up all the way to a minus 360 at some places. I mean, I'm seeing more so minus 333 at some points, but it looks like on average minus 360. That's almost 100 points in betting line for Big Ben. And like I said, Chris Barnett going from a plus 235 to a plus 260. Like, there's very limited ways for him to win this fight, but he has to close the distance. He has to land big kicks, chop the legs. I think that's where he can find a lot of success, man. Get those leg kicks in, keep your hands up, don't take a lot of, damage, because if Big Ben's just coming in with good body kicks and a good jab, this could be just a long fight of heavyweights playing a point battle, right? So let's keep it locked. I think it's going to be fun, but who knows, right? I think that could end up being even a boring striking battle between guys who are definitely a little heavy, right? So it's not your fastest pace. Still will be fun. I think Chris Barnett puts on a show for the fans anyway. So even with that said, should be a great show. Court McGee and Claudio Silva. I mean, these are two guys that are 100% on the hot seat. I think Claudio Silva is a bit more on the hot seat just because the style of fight that he kind of showed against James Krause to me was a little bit tiresome. I think that James Krause proved to obviously be the more technical fighter. He was able to dictate exactly where he wanted to keep that fight. He knew that getting out of that first round was key, and he did just that. Claudio Silva is obviously a great first-round fighter for the most part, and the guy owns a decision win over Leon Edwards, which is pretty insane. And he also started his UFC career at 5-0. That's pretty massive when you think about it. But again, I do believe that he is a start fast and then diminish type of fighter, but he's got those jiu-jitsu lungs that kind of keep him in the fight a little bit. But I think James Krause exposed him quite a bit. I think there was obvious areas for him to work on, especially with the gas tank and being able to keep it on the feet and stay technical. James Krause just looked like a different animal in there. Now we go into Court McGee. When you think about his 0-3 record, I mean, the big thing for me was in the Carlos Condit fight, he chose to stand and fight with one of the best technical strikers the welterweight division's ever seen. I think that was a really, really interesting call on his part. And by the time he kind of went for the takedowns, I think he'd already taken enough damage. He looked like he was slowed down a little bit. That was the part that I kind of, felt bad in that circumstance, because I felt like, obviously, it's really easy to say just get in there and get a takedown, but at the same time, it looked like Court McGee was very much interested in trying to stand and bang with Carlos Condit. And I mean, everyone wants to go for a knockout. Everybody kind of wants those finishes, but at the same time, a big win over a guy like Carlos Condit could have really kind of shifted your MMA career. And the best game plan against a guy like Carlos Condit is 100% trying to get it to the ground. And that Carlos Condit's been working on that for the most part in the later part of his career. He's been a great striker forever. So that's where I was kind of surprised in his last fight. But interestingly enough, raise your hand if you got a split decision win over Robert Whittaker, because that guy does. Yes, sir. So, in terms of just overall experience, that's what I really like about Court McGee. I think he's able to do battle with almost anybody. It's just about kind of getting him out of there, and he's a tough guy to finish. So when you consider energy-wise and what both guys kind of look like, unless Claudio Silva is able to really get this guy, up against the fence and get to the crowd, I think Court's able to handle a lot of what he brings on the feet. Court McGee's got good chin and he's got great durability. Maybe that beard keeps him in check for the most part, but in all these fights, I think that he's just shown that he can always stand and bang, right? The guy hasn't been finished since Ponzinibbio in 2016. Everything else has gone to decision. So even when you look at the losses, Carlos Condit, Sean Brady, who I think is a top 5 welterweight in the making, Diego Lima, Sean Strickland, and Ben Saunders. That's insane to me. For me, Court McGee is 100% one of those guys that is a perennial, on the outside looking in of the top 10, top 15, but he's still that good of a fighter, which puts him around that top 20, top 25, because in this fight, he's going to be taking on someone that I believe is more realistically in that level, despite the early parts of his career. I think there is a massive shift in what he's looked like in the recent fights, and Court McGee can expose that. I think that he's been good everywhere, right? That's the best part of his game, is that he's shown success everywhere. Now, game plan perspective and things like that, he needs to use big kicks, man. I think kicks against a guy like Claudio Silva, attacking the body, get him as tired as quickly as possible, get this guy's lungs done, because I think that when things get slippery, when things are, a little bit harder to land, you're kind of dictating most of the offense from that point on, right? I think that if Court's utilized a lot of his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over the course of his career, I mean, it's pretty impressive to see what he's been able to do, especially with that all-around MMA type of mentality. So to see the difference there. I mean, I don't think that he's going to be able to put on a similar performance as James Krause, but I think that trajectory-wise, you might actually see a surprise performance from Court McGee here. Now, in retrospect, do I believe that, I'm talking about him like he should be a massive favorite? I don't think so. I just think it's stylistically, this is a very winnable fight for him. Now, on the flip side, Claudio Silva needs to manage that energy, right? I think he needs to get in, work some good power shots, and also maybe get some body shots in with Court McGee. But I think that is a little bit more damaging to him because Court McGee's shown that he can take a good beating, right? And that's where Claudio Silva needs to be a little bit smarter with his punches, a little bit smarter with his power. Choose your takedowns wisely. Try to push him up against the fence with good punches and good combos, even if it's feints and fakes and all that kind of stuff. At least you're getting it closer to a position where you can kind of execute your game plan. And I think for Claudio Silva, who's primarily a first-round fighter, taking too much damage in the first round and not being able to find good timing in areas where you can get this fight up against the fence or to the ground and at least try and work a submission or some ground and pound in, even if you can't finish him, a good 3 rounds of that should be able to get you the win. The best part about a guy like Claudio Silva is he could maybe win the first 2 rounds and then just give up the first round or the third round and not get finished, right? Some of those kinds of fighters that have definitely found success in doing that, and he could be one of those. So Court McGee needs to do everything he can to not get finished in the first round and maybe even steal it, because in those next 2 rounds, he's definitely going with a big advantage. So let's take a look at these lines, because this is a fight that I truly believe can go either way. And plus 130 for Court McGee and minus 150 for Claudio Silva's openers. And I mean, that moved pretty much dead even, right? Across the board, you're seeing anything between minus 105, minus 150. And I think that's actually pretty simple for both guys. It's just a really tough fight to call, because I think that first round is going to dictate everything. If Claudio Silva can't get that finish, if he can't, get it to the ground or even land some big shots to rock Court McGee to then work in a takedown, it's going to be a long fight for him. And I think Court McGee's been enough, try tested and true type battles for him to really prove what he's worth. And then that's where you can see the line, right? It's interesting to see that he opened as the dog at plus 130, but I think that he more than deserves to be an even, coin flip on this one. And I think that would be my pick on this fight. I think that from what I've seen in Claudio Silva, it's just really tough to go against a guy like Court McGee, who has been able to kind of be in there with almost anybody, despite getting dominated in maybe some fights. It's just, this isn't the Carlos Condits of MMA, the Sean Brady's of MMA, the Sean Strickland's of MMA. I think that's where you're going to be able to see a bit of a difference. He's a little bit older now, but at 36 versus another 38-year-old, finally Court McGee might be able to get himself a nice little win in the UFC in 2021. So I'm going to ride with him. Maybe it's the heart, maybe I'm biased to some of my old tough boys, but Court McGee, that's going to be my pick. Probably going to make that one right now. If anything changes, you'll see it on my card. Don't forget, Instagram, you can see that full picks for the entire card by Saturday afternoon. Fights are early, so I'll make sure to get that up before lunch. Moving on. Ending off the prelims, man. Could this be a more exciting fight? I mean, if you're a big fan of those like high-flying strikers and versus those calm, poised, zen type fighters, I think this is one of those ones that's going to be really exciting. Now, the thing about Bill Algeo is, the Brendan Lafnane fight, I mean, I feel like that was one where he kind of lost a little bit of credibility, but he came back strong after, Ricardo Lamas, for that to be a UFC debut is pretty massive. And I think that he did what he could in that one. He definitely lost it. I think he takes a lot of damage. I think that's one thing about Algeo that's really interesting, is that he's a fighter that takes damage, but he shows poise. He shows his ability to, pick his shots. He's really good everywhere. And I think he showed that mostly in the Spike Carlisle fight, right? When you saw them take it to the ground, I think he was able to roll very well. I think he was able to transition pretty much in any position where I felt like he had the opportunity. I think he was calm, he was cool, he was collected. And then even in that bulldog choke, I felt like he was able to escape from the back pretty cleanly, just took his time and waited for his moment. That aspect of fighting, I feel like, is the hardest thing to come by. It's what really separates some of the guys that can get themselves out of really deep water, right? And that's what makes you enjoy Bill Algeo. Now, if he could keep his hands up just a little bit more and avoid some of those big shots from, his opponent, I think that would keep him in the fight a lot more, especially on, points and things like that. And, with Ricardo Ramos, like the thing that I really love about him is there was such a high trajectory, right? I felt like the UFC really expected him to be so good. But, when you meet technical strikers like Lerone Murphy, I think that really kind of humbles you in a way, right? You think about the way he approached the fight. The guy that just loves to go for broke in the first round. Think about the streak, right? Five straight wins in Legacy. This is what put him on the map. 4 of those 5 wins were first round finishes. Then he meets Manny Vasquez and loses his streak there. So that's the first loss of his career. But he comes back strong, and he pretty much gets his opportunity in the UFC. And I think that he just ran with it with flying colors. The way he started off, having a 5-2 record at his age, I think is absolutely phenomenal. And, when we talk about his losses, guys like Lerone Murphy are very humbling experiences where I think it kind of teaches him to be a little bit more patient and a little bit more disciplined with his striking and to pick his opportunities, because if he was able to maybe get it to a later part of the fight and maybe get it to the ground, I just think that was an opportunity for him to really learn a lot. And I don't want to be too hard on him with that one, but he's in the Bill Algeo fight. I think that he's going to have an opportunity now to take on someone who's not going to be so aggressive, might not be so technically sound in that striking department, because I think that Lerone Murphy showed that he was on a pretty high level with that skill. But I think Bill Algeo is a very good all-around fighter, which makes this such an amazing fight, right? I think that both guys show that capability of taking the fight anywhere. They both have different types of energy when it comes to that early part of the fight. I feel like Bill Algeo's ready to push the fight forward, but he's not going to throw a huge amount of volume. He's not going to be going for anything crazy flying. I think that he's going to be technical about it. He's going to be sound and calm, that kind of aspect to it. But Ricardo Ramos can be a bit of a wild man, right? And I think that in terms of, your experiences against guys like Lafnane and Ricardo Lamas, I think that all kind of culminates into the wins like Spike Carlisle. And now he's getting a guy who the UFC were really high on for so long, especially back over in like 2020. I think that the fights that he was taking was very much so to showcase just how exciting he was. And I think that this is going to come down to just being a technical battle, right? I think that Bill Algeo's ability to switch a lot is going to really help him. And if he can switch and use the kicks and not really get, having to deal with some of Ricardo Ramos's power shots, I think that's going to be the easiest thing. Because I just think that when you consider the Lerone Murphy and the, Said Nurmagomedov fights, I think that's the aspect of him just, learning and being, humble just a little bit from a technical perspective. And this is going to be one of those fights where maybe it's not the Sides and the Lerone Murphys of the world, but I think Bill Algeo is a well-rounded fighter, and that's going to be a problem for him if he's not able to kind of find those, confidence boosts when he does with his striking. I think that that's where Ricardo Ramos, if he's not able to kind of get those big opportunities in early in the fight, he doesn't seem to have a really good chin. I think that there's opportunities for Bill Algeo to kind of frustrate him, to push him into indisciplined positions and look for a finish early. I think that that's going to be some confidence boosters for Bill Algeo as well, because when you look at his record, you can kind of tell by type that he does like to push forward. He does like to get irresponsible sometimes. And if Ramos is, using his fight camp to improve on those things, that would probably be the best thing for his game, because I think from a well-rounded perspective, especially for where he's at in his UFC career, from a tier and who he's going to have to fight, everything's going to be a challenge right now. But, in terms of weaknesses and areas that we can kind of see that he needs to work on, that's a perfect example. So right now, looking at this fight, I think Algeo brings this cool, calm, collected energy versus Ramos's, high flying, looking for a finish type energy, while also having a bit more loose ends kind of in that first round. Such a close fight, especially if Bill Algeo doesn't keep those hands up. So I'm going to say it's a pretty close fight based on the odds, and coming to look at it without question, right? So Ramos opened as a plus 100 dog, with Bill Algeo coming in at minus 120, and now they're pretty much in and around a similar area, right? Bill Algeo's not really moving up past that minus 125, and Ricardo Ramos is, on average already in that minus area. So for me, pretty much a pick'em fight. I do think that this is going to be a tough one to call. I like Bill Algeo in this fight only because I think that the technical striking of somebody in this type of scenario where it's a little tougher to knock them out, I think that helps. I think when you look at his record, the last time he got finished, 2014, by none other than Shane Burgos. Now, for me, speaks volumes, right? Shane Burgos is a wonderful striker. And now when you go look at the tape for, our boy Bill Algeo, I really do believe that that's speaking volumes of how he's shown up since then, especially as a striker and not getting finished on the feet. So can't wait for the prelims to end on that one. I think it's going to be an absolute fire prelim card, especially with some of the early fights, especially if it goes 3 rounds. These guys are all athletic. It's maybe not the Barnett and Rothwell fight, but, you know, with that said, we're kind of rolling right into the Jack Hermansson Edmund Shabazian fight. I mean, if you watched our show with Edmund Shabazian and Derek Brunson, that was a call that we did make. That was an official pick as well in the pick'em. It's the well-roundedness, right? Unfortunately, even if you look back at that fight, those odds are absolutely ridiculous. Edmund Shabazian is a phenomenal striker, lifelong striker, right? Despite being so young, there's, you know, very, very clear tapes of him fighting from a very young age under...
Head movement, good job, Jeff! Come on, please!
Head movement. But at the same time, I think that Jack Hermansson is, you know, still flirting with that top level fighters. He's looked so good, even against a guy like Marvin Vettori. I think that outside of that first round that he kind of looked really out of place. He kind of brought it back, right? I think that he utilized some of Marvin Vettori's lack of energy in the later rounds. Jack Hermansson, one thing he's got going from is cardio. I think that we see him do so well when he has to go 3 rounds. And if the striking is kind of the primary issue for him, we obviously know he's a great ground fighter, right? So for Edmund Shabazian, it's all about avoiding those opportunities. Now, when you think about some of those stats, I kind of want to take a look here because I honestly believe that this is a huge fight for Jack Hermansson. When you think about where he came from with the Kevin Gastelum finish, you know, there's opportunities there against ex-champions. Now, I believe Derek Brunson's a top 3 middleweight at this point, and Edmund Shabazian was well on his way, just finishing absolutely everyone. Now he's 11-1, you know, looking at a guy like Jack Hermansson. Now, when you look at some of the numbers, the takedown defense, takedown accuracy, you know, Jack Hermansson doesn't actually have that great high takedown accuracy, you know, 34% versus 75% defense. I think that Shabazian's obviously going to want to keep this fight standing, but, you know, I think that Hermansson's an underrated striker, man. He's very economic in terms of landing, you know, 5 strikes per minute versus, you know, getting hit 3.4, 5, 4, 6. So I really think that based on his well-rounded abilities in a fight where he's going against a guy where there's a game plan, right? I think that Derek Brunson exploited a lot of things, and unless you believe that someone's able to improve for that long, which I believe that long of a camp is what you're working on, that's the way to do it, right? I don't think there's anything you can possibly do at this point to not focus on a similar game plan, because when you think about the striking, it's just, are you getting that good to kind of compete with a kid who's very much shown that he can stand with the best fighters, you know? I think that's where you just have to keep giving this kid a taste of that MMA medicine till it gets to, you know, that MMA well-rounded ability of like the rest of these guys in that top 5 to top 10. Now, Jack Hermansson is a guy that's seen some tough goes, right? I don't know if it's an opportunity more so for, you know, Edmund Shabazian than it is for Jack Hermansson, obviously, right? I think that you're obviously supplanting a big-time prospect who's ranked in the top 15, but Jack Hermansson's looking for a bounce-back fight in some ways, right? We need him to look for something similar to that Gastelum fight, which, you know, seems like ages ago after that Marvin Vettori loss. Now, he was supposed to fight him back in, you know, a week ago. These guys have been training for each other for a while now. I think that that's actually quite amazing that we're going to get to see another matchup where guys are getting to train for each other a little bit longer. It should spell for a good fight. I think that Hermansson should have an edge here. There's no reason to believe that you wouldn't give a guy who has a little bit more of that grappling advantage against a guy who's been exploited for that, despite being such a great striker, some power ability. But, you know, Jared Cannonier is a big time power guy, and I think that's a guy who, if you're getting knocked out by him, it's not a big deal. Now, that's who Jack Hermansson's kind of dealing with. Edmund Shabazian, maybe technical side, if he's able to get in there and really showcase some of that striking, different story, you know? I think Jack Hermansson has some good length here, and he fights long, which is going to help him a lot. Now, let's take a look at the lines, because I really do have to give Jack Hermansson the lean here without question. And there it is, you know, open as a -160. Edmund Shabazian comes in at +140. Hasn't really changed that much. You know, I think Jack Hermansson's still floating around that -150 to -160, but you got Edmund coming in around +125, +130. I think that there is some value on Jack Hermansson here. I think that experience-wise, there's a lot to be learned when you get to this level of fighter. The top 10 in the most divisions at this point now are just a different, you know, different level of beast. And I think that Jack Hermansson can showcase just how good he is in a fight where he knows that he's facing such a good striker that is in the process of becoming a better, well-rounded MMA fighter. Now, if you look at that one, it could go either way, right? Guy gets a good shot in. If you're an Edmund Shabazian fan, this is the one where head movement, if that's your thing, get it done. I think Jack Hermansson has a good opportunity here, though, to keep his top 5 rating, if not move up just a bit, because I think he's ranked number 6 right now versus on the UFC rating. So big fight for him in that sense, but monsters in that weight class, so he's definitely got a ladder to climb outside of that. So moving into the next one here, we're going back down to the 125ers with David Dvorak, and I think Rolian Paiva is one of the most exciting fighters that we haven't gotten to see enough, right? In that Rogerio Bontorin fight, we saw that. I made a post about it where 2.5 minutes basically of fight time, 11 significant strikes, and these guys are bloodied as hell. I mean, that knee that he took, I believe was a knee, and it was just an absolute banger of a cut above his eyebrow. So I kind of want to see that fight again, because it was just set up to be such an exciting fight. Now, as we've seen, Rogerio Bontorin came out with a massive win against Matt Schell last week. And now we got a big fight for Paiva against a David Dvorak, who we've seen against pretty good competition and looks the part, man. The thing that I want to say about Paiva is he's been tested, right? Kai Kara-France and Rogerio Bontorin are his losses. Kai Kara-France was a split decision. So I really like what he's able to kind of do across the board. His head is always up. It's my favorite thing about strikers that want to keep their, if you want to stay confident, you want to keep on your feet, man. If you're looking down at any point, you're throwing shots, if your overhand looks like this, I'm not a fan, man. I'm just not a fan. The Roy Nelson days are over. And I think in this case, you're seeing really, really good striking, versatile striking from Paiva. I think that he really likes to use his kicks too. The right power kick comes up a lot, throws it to the head very accurately. I think that it's his ability to keep the distance that makes him look so good. He fights long. And I think in previous fights, it's really tough to get in on him unless you're really powerful like a Rogerio Bontorin. I think that his wrestling and his ability to take the fight to the ground and hold him there was kind of how the fight was, playing out anyway. But every fight starts standing, which is what I think would have made that fight a little bit more exciting, especially in the later rounds, if Paiva does look as good as he looks, especially with energy. Now, looking at both these guys, Dvorak again is probably one of the more technical fighters. I think he knows that Paiva is going to be coming towards him. I think that he really likes to use his footwork and his movement. I think it looks pretty good for the weight class. Now, it's so funny to think these guys are 125ers, because even Dvorak looks pretty big for the division. And, Paiva's last loss was in 2015 via submission, and only 2 losses after that, which was a finish, is what I'm trying to say there. And outside of that, just keeps every fight competitive, right? His UFC win, Zimagulov, that is an amazing fight. If you want to just see how good he is technically, that's a beautiful fight to see just how well he keeps the distance. I think Zimagulov, who's such a good inside fighter with those boxing and his leg kicks, I mean, he's a little short, right? So he's got to get in. He's got to get into, inside that boxing range to even land those beautiful kicks. And unfortunately, Paiva just at all times was able to use the head kicks, keep him at bay, was able to use big punches, man, and he comes in straight. Hands up could be nicer, but again, I think most guys are looking to keep that movement, keep that flowingness, and he's got that, and that's what made him look so good in that fight. So I like the way his UFC career is playing out. He's definitely one of the big-time prospects to look out for, but so is Dvorak, right? 2-0 UFC fighter. And I really like who he's been fighting, right? We talk about Bruno and Espinosa. Like, these are big-name fighters, in my opinion. And I think for those to be your first 2 UFC fights, now you're getting a guy who's already seen fighters like Bontorin, who's beating Matt Schnell, lost to Kai Kara-France in a pretty good fight. So for me, this is like why it's becoming one of my favorite divisions, right? You got your Brandon Royvals, your Brandon Morinos. Like, these are just incredible fighters to me. And I think it's their gas tank and their ability to do so much athletically is what's making them so fun to watch. And this fight doesn't change that. I think Dvorak's our technical striker versus Paiva, who's going to be hella exciting, can kind of do it all. And I want to even take a look at these stats, because I think that some of these guys kind of surprise you along the, because they love striking, right? So when you look at the takedown defense, when you talk about Dvorak at 75% in his 2 UFC wins, then Paiva coming in at 80%, he's fought in the UFC for quite some time. So like I said, both of them are high volume strikers. They like to throw over 4 strikes a minute. I think that the accuracy is going to play a part. Size wise, I don't see much of an issue. Dvorak's kind of short, but he fights long, man. He's kind of thick. That's what I like about it. I don't think Paiva's going to have crazy huge success against the guy who's really able to use his footwork to get out of the way. But at the same time, he's just so exciting, explosive, and unpredictable. I think that that's going to allow him to kind of dictate a bit of the pace, especially early on. I don't think Dvorak's going to be ready for a guy who's so quick and just athletically sound and honestly such a good fighter. Like from a fighting perspective, his movement, his ability to keep his chin tucked but eyes up, like he just does a lot of things right now. Unfortunately, against a guy like Bantamweight, who we're now seeing make a really good case for becoming an up-and-coming flyweight, it's a different story, right? So that's what makes this fight pretty close to me. I think it's very tough to call, especially when you consider, you know, some of the competition we see him fight against. It's like, if Dvorak gets the opportunity against the Kai Francis of the world, like how would that play out? We've seen it with Paiva now. When you go look at Dvorak being a 2-0 fighter, how would Paiva do it? You know, MMA math, baby. It's my favorite thing. And it's what also makes it not easy to go and bet on every single favorite on the planet and just keep winning, right? So that's where I see this fight. I just think it's quite close, and I think that they're in weird junctures of their career where they're kind of even, but we haven't seen either guy do either or. And Dvorak is kind of now getting his best opponent yet, because Paiva, to me, for who he's fighting, even if you want to make an argument for the, you know, Jordan Espinosas of the world, I think Paiva's in a level where he's just really showcasing a different level of talent. And in this fight, I gotta say it's close. So let's go and take a look at these lines quickly. I mean, I consider this close in MMA at a -150 to a +130. Personally, I mean, Paiva, to me, as an underdog at that price, I mean, it closed in, right? Now it's looking at closer to a +115, and Dvorak sitting at a -145. That makes, you know, a little bit more sense. I think that that's a close fight to call, but I think we got to continuously give the edge to the technical striker, because when you look at their fight tape, I mean, their ability to read their opponent and make the right, you know, adjustments and make the right movements to be able to, you know, squeeze in their own strikes or takedowns, it seems to be the factor in Vegas's opinion. You know, every single technical striker on this card seems to be the favorite. Now, go bet all those single favorites and see if you win. Chances are you don't. I mean, that's how it kind of works out. It's why it's, you know, kind of fun to just, you know, do your thing, but you got to pick the right bets. You know, that's how it kind of works. At the end of the day, I think this one's a pretty tough one to call, but it's hard not to leave with Dvorak, but, you know, I cannot stack anything against Paiva. I think the speed is going to be an issue. I think his ability to move and see strikes and keep his opponent guessing, unless Dvorak can take it to the ground, which it doesn't look like he cares to do at all. I think a striking battle is going to be exactly where Paiva wants to take it, who might actually have, you know, a bit more of the offensive opportunities on the ground. So keep an eye on that one. I mean, Paiva could be a nice little underdog to take a look at if you're a weigh-ins type of person to see how they both come out. I mean, that could dictate a lot of the line as well. But I see that being a very fun fight, if not maybe the most fun on the card, depending on how these guys decide to fight. I mean, they could be boring as hell trying to figure each other out for an extended period of time, but I have faith it's going to be fun as hell. And you know, we can get into the next one with some of the nicest little ladies to take on, you know, MMA as a career. When you look at Felicia Spencer and you listen to her talk, I mean, does she look like an animal and a fierce competitor? Maybe not, but she 100% is. When you take a look at this girl's record being 8-2, an ex-Invicta champion, and frankly, Amanda Nunes and Chris Cyborg being your only two losses. Are you kidding me? I mean, the girl is an absolute beast on the mat. She loves wrestling. I think the striking is always going to need improvement, but you talk about just how good a girl like Amanda Nunes is. You know, this girl's able to take down most women at will, but she could not take her down. She went 0 for 6 or 7 takedowns, and I think that Amanda Nunes went 6 for 7 on her takedowns and landed over 130 or 140 significant strikes and threw over 200. So it was just a very dominating fight for 5 rounds where Amanda just couldn't finish her. So toughness factor, experience factor. I always talk about in MMA how some losses, if not most losses at this level now, just become learning factors and learning opportunities. Rose Namajunas is a great example of just how you can improve and take on pretty much anybody with the right mindset, right game plan, and right training camp. So I think that Felicia Spencer, you know, without even talking about Norma Dumont yet, is such an interesting case here in this fight, because when you look at her skill set, it's just someone that's really, really seen it all. And I think that when you even, you know, age factor, these girls are the same age, but you know, 8-2 versus a 5-1 with Chris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes as your losses is just a different animal, regardless of how good a 5-1 record can be. So Megan Anderson, Megan Anderson, let's say it correctly, knocked her out pretty cleanly. How that happened, I mean, let's be real. Norma Dumont was fairly responsible there. I think she came up. This is what I'm talking about. When, great example of the, head down fighter that I cannot stand, because this can happen to you if you don't have a chin of absolute cement. It's just an overhand, head comes down, and then, for a girl like Megan Anderson who just slips that right hand like it's in slow motion, just nails her with a right hook and drops her completely. The ref doesn't even allow follow-up punches, I don't think, and that fight was ended. So the way I see that, especially coming out of the Ashley Evans fight, where she looked like a great striker, I mean, how good did Ashley Evans Smith look? I was more so concerned about, seeing the early strikes that she was throwing, and then even though she was taking damage, the groundwork ended up coming into play. Norma Dumont looked like she learned a lot in terms of striking going into that fight, because I just like the way I'm not giving her too much credit for the damage that she did, but the damage that she avoided, in terms of just keeping away from the strikes, playing her game all fight long till she was able to get the win. I mean, I think that was a phenomenal fight for her to just get some UFC experience, full 3-round fight. Now, this is a different animal. Felicia Spencer and Ashley Evans Smith are not on the same level when it comes to pure MMA in 2021. You can't convince me. And so with this fight, I would be shocked if Felicia Spencer does not come in as a pretty significant favorite. I think that it's very hard to use the tape on Norma Dumont and come out saying that she has a great chance of beating Felicia Spencer, because for me, I think the wrestling's really good. I think that she's been able to showcase it against most women in the UFC except for Amanda Nunes, and that's why her takedown accuracy sits at 10%. Her takedown defense is at 14% because she gets taken down a lot, like 6 for 7 against Amanda Nunes. So when you think about the rest of her fights, let's eliminate the Amanda Nunes fight. I mean, Felicia Spencer has been fairly dominant outside of that Cyborg fight, right? 122 strikes versus the 38, still a decision win, but the other 2 wins that got her there, the Megan Anderson fight, we just talked about how Megan Anderson was able to finish Norma Dumont with a pretty beautiful counter right hook. But I mean, in their fight, Felicia won via rear naked choke with doing significant damage on the feet. I think that was a phenomenal fight to really showcase how good Felicia Spencer really is, because Megan Anderson was considered, and very recently considered, a title challenger, right? But unfortunately, she fell short of that. And I think that that's where she's also kind of considering career options, things like that. She's got a lot of options, so I think that she's quite happy with where she's at, especially given her own trauma. So Felicia Spencer, long story short, very pure athlete. I think that this woman is in it for the long haul. I think that she's proven that she can take on the best, and if this is anything close to a feeler fight, I think the lines will dictate that. So let's get right into those. And there it is, man. You cannot not think that Felicia Spencer is going to be a -300 to a -350 favorite. I believe that is an incredible line drop. Wow. Okay. So, I mean, I got to be honest. Norma Dumont, obviously good tape, bringing her down to a +150. I pretty much outlined all the great things that she did against Ashley Evans Smith, and I think that if she's able to keep the fight standing for the most part, she should be able to do some damage to Felicia Spencer. But is that to drop a line from -350 to -190? I am not so sure. And if this line continues to drop, I'd be very surprised to see if it doesn't kind of go back up come fight time, because maybe some of the, I don't know. Obviously, I'm a little bit more shocked by this line, and I guess I could say that, at -180, -190, I'd definitely be considering Felicia Spencer in a parlay or something like that. But I would hold your horses till you see the weigh-ins, to see how good they look in the face-offs. I mean, women's fights have been what kills most of people's pick'em cards, if you ask me. And so those are the cards where you want to be very careful at this point. That's my advice on pick'ems in general. As always, Saturdays, go check my Instagram account, Sooky MMA. You'll always see my pick'ems there. Haven't been doing the greatest since starting and middle points have been phenomenal. Killed the start of the year, then all of a sudden the last little few, I think that the judging in this sport is getting absolutely insane. Maybe the recovery from COVID is screwing everybody up, but I'm saying, jokes aside, I think that this is a great fight for the female, divisions. And in my opinion, I'm shocked that Felicia Spencer got dropped so much to a -190, but I wouldn't be surprised if that one goes back up. But speaking of going back up, let's move up on this fight card. Justin Tafa and Jared Vanderaa. The things that I like about this fight are definitely the first round. I think this could be the most exciting first round on the entire card. I think that Vanderaa, when you look at the way he fights, he forces a classic team quest, right? I have a funny story about this, but, I went into some pretty deep footage of Vanderaa over the last little few fights that he's had, and I always knew he was from Team Quest, but I always really thought that he kind of looked like Sal Malvi and all that kind of stuff. And hold and behold, there is actual footage of them training together, the mats multiple times. They seem very, very close. I mean, they could pass for brothers, man. Even the way he strikes, it looks just like him. It's actually kind of funny. But when I found that out, I never got a chance to kind of share that story. But it's really cool to see that Team Quest style of fighting still be in there with those two. And on the flip side, that Team Quest style of fighting does have some, holes in its game in terms of being that complete fighter, because the wrestling base is great, but you have to be that kind of athlete that can do it for 5 rounds if you're going to really succeed at it. Someone that I think of is Chad Mendes, man. Chad Mendes in his prime was one of those wrestlers that always comes to my mind as a guy who was really able to do everything, but he had the energy to really, be a certain type of fighter for 5 rounds, unless your name was Jose Aldo. And that's what made him so good to me. Okay, Conor McGregor as well. But outside of that short notice fight, I really think that that's where I think that the wrestling needs to be used more. So everyone says, best base to have in this competition, but that also comes from a defensive, aspect of things. If you're a striker, you want good wrestling to avoid taking any type of damage towards the ground game and keep the fight standing. In this case, I think that Justin Tafa has the ability to avoid any big opportunities in the first round. He's smaller, significantly smaller. He's going to have to deal with some of those kicks coming up. He's going to have to deal with some good jabs, but if he can get through that, get into boxing range, especially in the second and third rounds, if he gets through the first, it's a big win for him. I think that is where he can win the fight, second and third rounds, even if he can't finish it, which I still think he should be able to. Vanderaa has shown, significant abilities to tire out. I mean, I want to give him credit. The Harry Hunsucker fight was something that you just noticed him take out a very tired fighter towards the end of that first round. But then you look at the Spivak fight, right? Maybe they kind of tossed him to the wolves with that one a little bit, because Spivak has really been proving himself when you're taking on guys like Tai Tuivasa, who's now, rewriting his career completely. It's one of those things where you really want to ask yourself, was that a tough fight for Vanderaa in the first place? But now he's getting someone that's a little bit more on the come up. And I think that that's where it's going to be a little tough, right? Justin Tafa, it's 4-2. His career is very easy to kind of go back and take a look at, right? You look at the Yorgan De Castro fight, that exact same setup. I kind of brought this up the last time he fight, but it's almost like he learned from it very, very quickly, because he goes and gets a huge win of his own in the exact same way. And that's what I absolutely loved about his game, is that you can kind of see that patience brewing. You can see that, he's able to read the fight, with our boy Carlos Felipe. That was one of the most beautiful fights, right, of last year, when those two kind of went at it. I really enjoyed that boxing range fight. Put the heads together and just, I loved it. I loved every second of that. And, split decision loss. Great fight. I don't think that's one MMA, man. 4-2. Obviously, you want to maybe turn that into a 5-1 instead. But I think that when you look at the losses, there's definitely things to learn. The Juan Adams fight was case in point of how well he learned, how to change his game up in terms of being patient. I think that was the major difference. Yorgan De Castro was in a situation where I think that he kind of lost his footing there and was a little bit less, disciplined than he should have been. Now he goes against a guy like Jared Vanderaa, who's going to welcome a brawl. I think that if it goes into the later rounds, Tafa should have a much, 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 much higher significance in terms of just output, power, all that stuff. I think that if he even wanted to take it to the ground, maybe he could do some damage via ground and pound and keep the fight, top position, that kind of thing. Now, going to the first round, he's got to avoid the power shots. He's got to avoid the ground game. I think that if he's on his back for too long in the first round, not only is Vanderaa going to use up a lot of his energy to land big blows, but could also tire Tafa out for how hard he's going to make him work. That's the big part of his game that I think that's going to be tough to overcome. He's shown great success in the first round in most of his fights, but he does fade. I think that's going to be one of the best parts of that card. That first round, keep an eye on it. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. Outside of that, I mean, there's a couple of things I did want to talk about, and it's like Fovac, the guy who got jumped in New Zealand, and like they're taking this to the court level of trying to change these laws because supposedly, but Australia has enacted the sucker punch law, let's call it that, and New Zealand has not, and it's basically causing gang violence in some areas, but in this case, a guy just got jumped by 4 dudes for no reason, got punched in the head. Now he's on life support. The entire MMA community is now, trying to support this whole case, and it's connected to big names like Israel Adesanya, Brad Riddell, Kai France. Now guys like Justin Tafa are fighting for that difference, right? I think it's really, really important to kind of spread that situation, because that was a promising young fighter with a family of his own, and it sucks to see this kind of stuff go down. And for the fact that that's kind of a law that's not even getting passed when it's being put into, some optionary like types of periods, that's kind of crazy to even think about. But all in all, like, getting back to the fight, I think Tafa has some nice little momentum to fight for on his shoulders. That's going to give him some extra energy in that. Classic option here, where I like to bring up the 100% offensive takedown versus the 100% takedown defense. I mean, are these the kind of guys that are doing the opposite? Probably not. So that's where I kind of like to see that showcase showdown. Shout out Price is Right. But I think that's the beautiful part, where I think these guys are going to be able to showcase just what they can do and who can come out with the win. Now, overall, do I believe that this fight should be close via lines? I think so. I think that Vanderaa could have success in the first round and really keep the fight in his game if he's able to tire out Tafa and avoid any big shots, boxing range, things like that. On the flip side, we kind of touched on Tafa pretty clearly. So without further ado, baby, yeah, Tafa coming in at minus 205, and now looking at minus 175 to a minus 190, kind of jumping all over the board there. Plus 175 for Vanderaa to a plus 150 now. I think that's pretty fair. I thought that it might be a little bit closer, but I can 100% agree with this line. I do think that a parlay between Felicia Spencer and Justin Tafa seems like a really good option here. I would consider that off the bat right now without really looking at the weigh-ins and stuff like that. But obviously line movement, things like that are things that I want to keep an eye on. But without further ado, let's talk about Xiaonan and Carla Esparza. I think Xiaonan is someone that reminds me a lot of Zhang Weili, right? She seems to be a lot more technical in her striking, and obviously it's easy to say now with the way Rose kind of, sent shockwaves through the world of MMA, but I think that in this case, you're seeing someone who's able to deal with a lot of damage and recover really well. If you look at the fights that where she's not even won the first round, Angela Hill and Claudia Gadelha are two fighters that you can actually tell that their first rounds are very, very successful and they're able to utilize their game plans, but they're two fighters that actually fade quite a bit. And when you look at the way Zhan comes into this fight, I mean, man, she's just incredible, right? She literally learns her opponent in the first round and then takes over for the next two. And that's against maybe top 5 caliber fighters in the UFC already. So I think that's where you kind of differentiate between all these fighters that are coming in from China right now. There's a lot of promise with her. I think that if you look at even her record, she's put together some great UFC wins. And wait till I get into Cookie Monster in my head. I'm really getting excited about that. But, 5 straight wins right now. I mean, I think that's something where, for me, it's really exciting to see a girl go 13-1 and also put together that kind of UFC run. Sorry, I said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6-0. So that's a beautiful thing right now. I think that the Karolina Kowalkiewicz is the biggest fight for me. I think that 30-26 across the board really dictates where she's at in her career. Karolina is also not doing so well after some of the losses she's taken. It looks like it's back to the drawing a little bit for her, and we've heard that she's actually now switching up her training camps, things like that. So best of luck to her. I hope to see her back soon. Now, going into those Claudia Gadelha and Angela Hill fights, I mean, the Gadelha fight, right after those first 2 takedowns in the first round, never got taken down again. Claudia Gadelha kind of got tired a little bit, and then she just started pieced up on the feet. I think that Yan was able to really figure out where Claudia Gadelha was going to be and was able to land strikes with ease. It was 100% with ease. Didn't take much damage after that. With the Angela Hill fight, similar procedures there. I just think that this is a fighter that will be fighting for a title at some point in her career. Depending on this fight too, it could be very, very soon, right? Carla Esparza is working her way back up the UFC ladder, and she's probably one of my favorite fighters on the planet. She's also from an era where the strawweight division wasn't really so successful, and she's also the fighter that kicked off the Joanna Jędrzejczyk era. That's where the UFC flyweight female divisions really took off, and with her, it was like the inaugural champion who beat Rose Namajunas that first time around. It's kind of incredible to think that where she had to go in life, and not making that kind of right money without much exposure and all that kind of stuff. It's such a it's a slightly sad story, but at the same time, like, she's such a story of perseverance, and I can't help but fall in love with that. She's such a good fighter from a let me take damage and push forward, and I fall in love with fighters like that, obviously. But I think her striking has always been getting better. She's great footwork, wrestling, probably one of the best in the division. She's also quite small, right? So I think that this is a fight where, with a powerful fighter like Yan, you have to get in close. I think that getting past those strikes, especially in those later rounds when clearly I think Xiaonan has zero indication of tiring out, that's where Carla is going to have to really push pace. She's going to have to be technical about it, get her up against the fence as much as possible. The beautiful thing about this fight is that we know that Carla can take damage, man. At the end of the day, some of the best strikers in the world are really going to have to put it on her to be able to take her out, and that's what they've done. And in this case, I'm not saying that Yan can't do it. I am just saying that from a wrestling perspective, from an all-around perspective, I mean, that's where Carla's really going to have to try and exploit her game. I think this line could be very, very tough against Carla Esparza, especially from what we've seen from Yan against really great fighters. But at the same time, you have to go look at Carla's recent record. She's still putting together the right wins. She's still done her game plan has always been fairly similar, but she's getting better and better at executing it. And I think that's where, I mean, Khabib is a very great example too, right? I don't think he really cares too much about what you're doing, but he'll make sure he knows. But he's just getting better and better and better at what he does, to the point where he's the best. And I think that that's where Carla has to just keep up with the rest of the competition here. But she's shown that. I think that if you look at her last 4 fights, right? Jandy, Roba, Grasso, Watterson, Rodriguez, the 2 splits with Watterson and Rodriguez were fairly close, but at the same time, man, that wrestling game, it is something to marvel. She is so exciting to watch. If you are a true MMA fan, Carla Esparza is an exciting fighter to watch. Talk about hot takes. That's a motherfucking hot take for you. Carla Esparza is a fucking exciting fighter, and I'm really, so pumped up to watch her again. I think that if you consider the Marina Rodriguez against Michelle Watterson fight, the fact that she took both of them, even to those split decisions, we saw just how good of both those strikers are. Karate Hottie with those kicks, Marina Rodriguez with that boxing, Carla Esparza still beat both of them on paper. So without question, whether you have disagreements with that, you cannot hate on Cookie Monster for what she's put together. The perseverance is phenomenal. You have to love this woman. She personifies what MMA has stood for all these years. And right now, this second come up, I'm not putting it on Charles Oliveira level, but I mean, I still think that this is one of the women to watch, and without question, always makes her fights exciting. And I'm so happy that she's getting, co-main event on this card before a fight that everybody's going to be excited for, right? So before we jump into Font and Garbrandt, let's take a look at the lines for Esparza and Yan. Obviously, I believe that Yan is going to be coming at a minus 200 or higher. There's just no reason for me not to think that that's the case. We're going to go look. Man. Okay. My girl. Look at that. Yan coming in at minus 185. I'm kind of angry I missed this line. If I could have caught Carla at a plus 160, I would have been a little bit happier. For me personally, I don't think I'd ever touch this at a plus 100 to a minus 130. If anything, I think that line of Yan is kind of crazy to me in terms of just, body of work, things like that. This is the types of fighters that, Carla does kind of struggle with. The accuracy is there. The ability to avoid the takedown should be there, especially in the later rounds. Godella, same thing, right? 2 takedowns early, then slowly fell apart in the later parts of the round when it came to that type of fight. But Carla Esparza, gas tank for days, heart bigger than probably anybody's, despite that size. And I think Cookie Monster is ready to eat again. And so the lines are obviously, let's say the line movement is obviously dictating that. Looks like Carla's, pretty much fluctuating between a plus 100 and a plus 110. I can't believe that. I'm pretty happy for her. And then Jan's, moving down from a minus 25 all the way to a minus 125 to a minus 130. I'm pretty pumped about that fight, man. I think Carla's going to bring it. I think Jan's going to bring it. And if Carla can stay, aggressive and keep her guessing for 3 rounds, I think she could eke out another close decision, and bing bang boom, baby, it's title shot for that girl. Cookie Monster time. Let's get it. As you can see, I try not to show bias very much, but there's some fighters that just bring that out in me. And 2 weeks in a row, Charles Oliveira, Carla Esparza, these are 2 fighters I hold in high regard. And so I'm really, really excited to see 2 weeks in a row fighters like that, get their opportunities. And Speaking of which, right? Cody Garbrandt, Rob Font. Cody Garbrandt. Let's talk about double Dillashaw and, tough fights, right? Tough fights. I think the Pedro Munoz fight is probably one of my favorite 30 seconds of a fight of all time. I'd put it in the top 10 at least, right? Craziness. What is Cody thinking? I believe is Joe Rogan's exact line when that's happening. I don't know what he was thinking. The man just turns into zombie mode and just goes for broke. I think that Pedro Munoz even said before that he believed that he was the better technical striker. He's barely ever been, knocked out or anything, whether it's training or fighting. So he felt very confident getting in those swinging battles. And let's be real, man, that's how Cody loses. Cody's phenomenal when it comes to technical striking, but when he wants to brawl, he leaves himself so open, it's actually scary. And it's almost like a street fight at that point. And I think that the fighters that are able to think on their feet and use their footwork and land some of their own power shots, they clearly are giving enough trouble to Cody to make them obviously drop him pretty hard. Now, outside of that, right? When he uses that head movement, when he keeps his hands up as much as he possibly can, when he uses all of that type of technical skill, he obviously does a lot better. I think the Assunção fight, he waited for his opportunity. He did not rush. In fact, how hard was your heart beating when he was up against that fence? It's pretty simple that everybody's heart was breaking out of their shirts, right? I think that for me, it was, I was on my feet for that fight, man. And when he landed that, it's like, there's nothing like looking at replays when you're able to reminisce the actual event. Like when you can transport yourself into the moment, when you experienced it, it makes it a little fun. And that's what makes music so great too, right? The nostalgia. So for me, Cody is one of the most nostalgic fighters in MMA because his pre-game and all that stuff leading up to the fight, plus his actual in-octagon presence is phenomenal. You can't not love Cody, love Garbrandt, because the kid is just so freaking exciting. And I don't want him putting his life on the line so much. I want him keeping his hands up. I want him taking his time. I want to see that head movement and technical boxing so much more. Even that, he's not as, when he gets to these higher levels too, the kicks are definitely able to help him set up. His combos are so fast, right? That's what makes him exciting. And so with that defensive aspect of his game, his 100% takedown defense, the guy's an absolute monster. Such a beauty fighter in the game. And I think that in this case, once again, Rob Font. What is Rob Font good at, man? Rob Font is a freaking good boxer. He's a great boxer. He switches stance, after he throws his power shots, almost like a defensive move to wait for you to kind of react, maybe throw something back. I love that he uses his boxing so well. The jab is pinpoint accurate. I think that this is going to be a tough fight when it comes to the stand-up game for Garbrandt. His toughest test yet, because Rob is going to wait for you to make a mistake. He did that with such a great technical striker like Marlon Moraes, who's now seen similar outcomes against guys like him and Corey Sandhagen. And I think both those guys are pretty similar, right? I think they have that beautiful counter-striking length. But how good is Rob Font's boxing? I think that I'm pound for pound, I put him pretty high in the UFC, right? I think that that's how good he's looked. He doesn't take much damage on the feet. And looking at the Ricky Simón fight, I was kind of interested in how Ricky Simón was able to kind of not get his take. He's just looked so good lately, right? And so I remember watching that fight originally and just always thinking that Rob Font's boxing looked so great, but in that fight, man, the way he uses his guillotine to get back to his feet, the way he's able to make Ricky Simón work so hard to keep it on the ground, even though he gets the takedowns. I mean, that's how Rob Font, really was able to dictate that fight a bit more. It's like in Ricky Simón's most opportune parts of the game, he really couldn't get anything done. And that made me really excited for what could come. And I think in this case, you're seeing two guys, technical strikers, both guys who might get irresponsible, but I think you give a bit more of the edge, just like you would Pedro Munoz, to Rob Font, because the technical striking is there, maybe the chin advantage is there. But if this stays technical and Cody stays disciplined, my word, you're looking at a potential fight of the year. This is going 5 rounds, ladies and gentlemen, 5-round fight. Think about that. If these guys are able to go 5 rounds, it's going to be one of the best fights of the year. Trust me on that. Trust me. Oh my God, I got myself excited. So without further ado, let's take a look at these lines. pretty much even live. Doesn't matter where you go. -115 some places, -110 some places, still even. Now, opening line. Rob Font -125, Garbrandt +105. I believe that actually opened the opposite way for a little bit and it switched back. That's what I remember seeing in this fight, because I was really curious to see how good Rob Font's boxing is stacking up to Vegas against Cody Garbrandt's indisciplined, fighting in previous fights, even with what Rob Font, did to fighters like Marlon Moraes. So looking at this fight, I don't know what to say. I think the under is a phenomenal bet here. Chances are the juice is pretty high. So when you're looking at parlays in this fight, we kind of laid out a couple like the Tafas and your Felicia Spencers and your unders in the main event. And, I think the Carla Esparza fight was an interesting one. I thought that was going to be a little bit more of a, I was excited to kind of showcase her as a much bigger dog, but she deserves it, man. And I'm really excited to watch her fight again. So from top to bottom, you're looking at the beauty of the fight game right now is there's just so much talent coming up. The fact that this main card is opening with Jack Hermanson and Edmund Shabazian, let's be real. This could have been a main event, 3-4 months ago. So that's what's making this card really stand out to me. It's squeezed in between such prolific fights with the most prolific names over the last 5 years of fighting. So that's what's overshadowing a lot of these fight night cards. But man, it's going to be great. Trust me on that one. And as always, guys, like, follow, subscribe, go over to Instagram, Sooky MMA, Twitter, the Sooky Scoop. I'm going to be live tweeting quite a bit now. A couple buddies want to do a post show. We've been brewing that a little bit, so we'll see where that goes. But all in all, man, I've been enjoying this. I hope you guys are too. Starting to see more comments. Let's keep it going. Sooky MMA, UFC Vegas 27. Peace.